been doing for a couple of years. Finally got an opportunity to present it here at PASS Summit. So I'll go through the housekeeping. You have the right to silence your phone. If you give up the right to silence your phone, this lady will laugh at you mercilessly and post the results on all social media, while your mother in the background looks on disapprovingly. So if you haven't noticed this, you've probably seen this slide, but PASS is not just PASS Summit. They also offer SQL Saturday events. They have some online events. They have the virtual chapters online. They also host or organize the local chapters in your city. If you don't have one in your city, there might be one nearby, driving distance. Also, the virtual groups do meetings usually at least once a month, and those videos are available on YouTube. You can watch them anytime, and you see some of the same presentations you'd see here as a group. One other thing, too, if you're looking for something to do after this session, Speaker Idol is in room 2AB this year. Highly recommend you go seeing it. I would not be here if it were not for Speaker Idol, because they never accept this session without me winning it and not giving them any choice. Okay. Also, you've probably seen this too, session evaluations. I would love feedback. If you could go to the site, and you have until next Friday the 15th, and you can be entered for a prize. So this is my face from about 18 years ago, and in the right, these are the faces I make today at my job. I am the lead DBA at Cox Automotive by virtue of being the only DBA at Cox Automotive. So I've seen a few things. I've put some things together and targeted a presentation for mostly DBAs, and I do deranged things in SQL Server, so you don't have to. You don't have to go and struggle and figure out ways to do this stuff. I've done a lot of it for you. So this is my disclaimer slide that this is not a practical session. If you are looking for real-world solutions to real-world problems, no. This is me creating real-world problems for people who piss me off. But if there's another session you'd rather be at, because I know there's one I'd rather be at, by all means, go to that session if there's still room. Do not do this in production. Okay, if you're going to do it in production, keep your resume updated. All right, very important. Yeah, don't put this on your resume either. But yeah, very very important. And to give you some idea, I'll just put in a quick little screen switch. And if you bear with me, because I have about 90 windows open, I got to find the right one. It's in here somewhere. Nope, that was not it. Oh boy. Nope, that's not it either. And that's the virtual machine. Ooh, this was, here we go. That one. So, way back in the day, I used to work for the AdventureWorks company, AdventureWorks database, and we loved having copies of the database available. You know, we're DBAs, we're redundancy, we like having copies of AdventureWorks around, so we kept a few copies around, and it's a nice little initiation for new employees to say, hey, well, the data's in the AdventureWorks database, you know, you can go find it. And as time progressed and everything like that, we got into different naming conventions and stuff. One of the nice things we've noticed is with the introduction of touch screens to most computers is Braille is now an option for database names. So highly recommend that you do that. Works really well, especially if the power goes out and you have just enough light to see it. Some other names too, we found sometimes our databases don't necessarily want a name. They haven't yet chosen their identity yet. They just, just don't have anything there. One of them is a proud, got no name. The other is kind of shyer, a little thinner. This one's really just introspective and doesn't know. Plus we have the typical, user group, whatever names. So we created a database named Create Database. But we got into a naming scheme that we really enjoy. And that's where we just, name the tables Enjoy. And we name all the columns Enjoy. It's just an enjoyable word. So this is sort of the gist of what you'll be seeing for the next 70 minutes or so. Like I said, disclaimer, you can leave anytime you want if you're interested. So back to the slides. So about, I'll do a quick survey here about how many of you are DBAs, mostly DBAs, primarily DBAs. Perfect. You are the exact audience you should be here. So that's about half of you. How many of you are developers? You're not supposed to be here. Okay, there's about About 25 or 30 of you. That's fine. You already drive your DBAs crazy. Now you can drive them more crazy. Have them watch this presentation. There's a few video versions of it. How many of you have a table named group or user or have spaces in the names? Oh, that's not a lot. That's only about 20 or 30 people. Okay, so if you people that don't have those are hiring, let me know. And how many of your devs use select asterisk and everything? Okay, that's more like that's about 30 or 40. And need SA permissions for everything, like select get date? Yeah. Okay. How many of you are completely sociopathic? Great. And I know, Rob, that's not correct. You shouldn't use the term sociopathic DBA because it's redundant. So in this case, this is the session for you. I'll go over a couple interesting things you can do with SSMS. I know Azure Data Studio's out, but I've found most of these things work better in SSMS. Also, we'll get into some naming conventions that we'll test, the ones that make group and user and space tables, see how dedicated they are to those theories. We'll also mention to them that, how to use SA properly, which is to not use SA properly, and to convince them and persuade them that they should stop using it. There's some preventative stuff here. It's not entirely a silly presentation. There's some things in here that I've sometimes used to save my job. And then lastly, we'll get into some nasty stuff where you want to have a really good lawyer and travel plans to a country with no extradition treaty. So we'll get into the SSMS settings and things like that you can play. And this is, again, for people who leave their workstation unlocked who you don't like. And, go for lunch or whatever, come back. Some stuff you can change there. So let's get into that. I gotta find there we go. So SQL Server has a couple features that I'll demonstrate that you can take advantage of. One is that it supports multiple languages. You can change the language, your default language, to English. Apparently British is a different form of English than English. I'm not sure why. And a few other languages. And one of the other things is not only do you get some output in different languages, but they also have regional settings, like you'll see with the time zones and things like that. And one of those that it picks up from the default language would be the date order. So I have some date values here that are 2-digit dates. So this is something you can do for your coworkers who are still using 2-digit dates, is just change the language on them. Because as you can see, when I put in 13 for the month, in the US English language, it doesn't come out as a date, won't convert as a date. But you'll see that 13 does convert in British English because they put the day first, then the month, then the year. And that's pretty much every other language except English in the US. So this really doesn't work overseas in foreign countries unless you have a US person come over and visit. But as you can see, you get the different here. We also have the character set changes. So in this case, Korean will show a different character set. And that's not just the output of that query when I'm querying the table. It also affects the error messages that you get. So this is a nice little drive-by you can do. Just set the language to, I think this is Japanese or Korean, and they have a different alphabet, so this will confuse them, hopefully. And they won't know how to do it. And if you don't want to pick any of those, you have 34, I believe. We have about 34 languages you can pick. A lot of the names, they'll have 2 different names. One will be in the natural alphabet, and get down here so you get the names of the months, the date settings, and so on. So it's a handy thing to have if you have to support multiple languages, or if you don't, you just want to screw with your coworkers. So a couple other settings you can do pretty quickly. Here's a good one. This is a good query tuning technique if you never want results. That's to set noexec on, and it does pretty much what you expect. Comes back instantaneously, but with no results. You want one that's a little bit more cryptic, you'll have parse only, set that on, and again, hey, no results, really fast. But this one, I really enjoy format only. This one actually returns an empty result set very quickly. And this is a great way to make people think, hey, did you accidentally truncate all the tables? Because they won't get any results from anything there. We also have these settings here while this is nice to do a set and walk away and delete and all that, if you want to not have to get up every time from your desk to do that, you can go up into Tools and go into Query Results and Query Execution, and you can set some of those settings here. So you can go into Set No Exec and Set Parse Only up here, so every time they connect, they will get no data. And you sit at your desk and say, well, it works on my machine. What else can you do? A few other things here. Oh, this is a great one. Disconnect after query executes. This is awesome for when they do those cross joins with temp tables and get like a billion rows in a temp table and brings the thing to, because once the query finishes, it disconnects and drops it and they got to run it again. So that's one. You also have these other settings here that I don't have a really great demo for, but you can set the lock timeout to a rather generous 1 millisecond. So if they have those huge table queries, you have 1 millisecond to get the lock, otherwise the query is aborted. Same thing for the cost limit. The cost limit is a little high, but if they, again, write these million-row cross-joins, that'll blow out and that will cancel a query. So have some fun with those. I'm going to reset these because the demos fail when I don't. We also have some interesting settings here. I'll do one and I'll come back to it. So we have set row count for the, how many people used SQL Server prior to version 7? You guys I know here, so it's not too many of you, because we didn't have the top keyword in, I think, version 7. Well, maybe it wasn't 7. It was not prior to version 7. So if I wanted to have only 10 rows, I would have to say set row count 10. In this case, I don't need 10 rows. I'll just set it to 1 row. And then when I go to a new window after that, every query I run only returns 1 row. So that's a good setting to change as well. The other setting, too, is we have, no, that's wrong, I apologize here. As you saw earlier, we have the batch separator character, and you've seen this in scripts, and you've heard probably that go is not actually a SQL command. It's just something that separates batches of commands that you'd run, but you don't have to use go. You can use any word, any alphabetic. It has to be alphabetic. You can use any word that starts with an L. I think it's only alphabetic characters, so you can just take that, and then I have to start a new window and go in here. Now, the only other thing is that it's got to be on a line by itself, but when you run it on a line by itself, well, you kind of get an error. For some reason, it doesn't like it when you use from as a batch separator, but that's an option for you if you want. You can use select, you can use where. It sadly doesn't work on a single semicolon, which would be really nice havoc to be wrought. Let's get back to here, reset all of these. We have a couple more in the query results. We have the ever-popular discard results after execution up here as well. You can set it differently for results to text or grid mode for extra confusion. You can also dial down the amount of text. I think it goes down to 30. That's about the limit. But if they have these huge monster columns that they rely on getting, well, you can just knock that down a little bit. Let me reset these. There. So, no, I don't want reset. Oh, you have to reset every menu? Oh, that's annoying. All right. So those are your SSMS drive-bys. There you go. And fun for the whole family. And you can find them again in the tools.options menu. And I will go back to my slides here to get into naming conventions. So we all know that the two really hard computer science problems are cache invalidation, naming things, and off by 1 errors. So what I'll do is I'll go into some sample naming conventions that you can use in your databases. I need to change my database here. Connect to my other instance here. So I have my handy space database here that I'll go into. And I'm going to create a couple of interesting table names and put some sample data in them, because what happens is with these names is you get some very interesting queries here, like select asterisk from. This is a completely legitimate query. And if I'm really feeling like I'm stuttering or just having a mental brain fart, I can select from where equals, and this returns data. You can do some interesting things as well, because you've probably seen the set quoted identifier setting, and this is what controls how a double quote mark is interpreted, whether it's delimiting an identifier, meaning an object, or if it's delimiting a literal string. And I hope you can see in the colors that when I turn it off, it actually turns red versus being black up here. And then when I run these select queries here, I get different results depending on when I turn off quoted identifier. When I use square brackets, I always get the column name, conveniently named Asterisk. When I select it with quoted identifier on, I get the same column, but when it's quoted identifier turned off, it gives me a literal string. So this is another nice little drive-by. If they upsized from Microsoft Access and they still use double quotes for all their strings, you turn quoted identifier off, and you get to do fun stuff like this. We'll do the two here. So if I use single quotes for a string, I always get a literal string, literal comparison. If I use square brackets, I always compare two identifiers. And then if I switch off and on, you get the behavior you saw before. Same exact query, different setting, now you get different results. If you could set up your production system like this, I mean, this is really contrived. I mean, I would be pretty impressed. I wouldn't suggest storing your data this way with these names and stuff like that. But that's something that's there. I'm going to go into my blank database again. I already got an object named nothing, so I'm not going to create that. So I would recommend not running this one in production in particular. For those that don't know, this is an undocumented procedure, and it enumerates all of your objects, all your tables, and then it substitutes the table name where the question mark appears. I can do it because I've practiced this demo many times. Oh, it worked, okay. But as I mentioned before, you know, people put spaces in the names. Let me go and open up Calvin here. Go to space table. And as you can see, we don't have any tables here. I'm going to dock this here. So I'm just going to go and create a little table here, and I go and refresh tables, and I have a nice little lonely table over here. And it doesn't really have much going on here. It's just got a highlight, it's just a little dot in the middle of nowhere. Pale, yeah, kind of pale blue dot. Carl Sagan. Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to give him a friend. I'm going to do this. Create a new table, refresh, and now there's two of them. Very happy. And they're about the same size, so they're easy to differentiate from one another. But, you know, they're probably still a little lonely and everything, so I'm going to add a couple more friends for them here. And refresh here. And now you got a whole family of white space tables. Some have, you know, pretty good healthy diets. Some are gluttonous, as you can see. They're wider than the others. They're kind of fat and all that. But the nice thing is this is, as a naming convention, is how wide is the highlight in Object Explorer. You want the really wide one, the thin one, the whatever. But they don't need real names. You could just give them, you know, highlight widths. And that's better than most of the naming conventions I have to work with. So I will once again run this procedure you're never supposed to run, and we'll refresh. And as you can see, now we don't have any tables left in this database. So I'm going to hide that. So I'm going to come down here again, and I'm going to select from some system objects just to show you, there's no magic here, that there are no data sources. There are no tables, and there are no views. There are no user tables or views in this system, in this database. But I'm going to do select top 10 from sales order detail from AdventureWorks. And it's going to fail because I didn't set up the link server ahead of time. This is actually, I can still show you this. This actually refers to a synonym called sales order detail. This synonym has the same name as the object in AdventureWorks, but the synonym actually points to, I'll just pick one here, script it out to new window. It actually points to a completely different instance than the one I'm on right now. So this could point to a different database. This could point to a different object in the same database. In this case, it's a completely different server. So if I set up the link server, then you would have been able to get data out of that query that I just ran. But that's one way of hiding your data. You go into a database and there's no data in it. No one looks at the Synonyms tab. How many of you have seen the Synonyms tabs before? Really? Wow. Oh, that's good. Okay, so you all use Synonyms then. No, we just opened the tab. There's nothing there. You know, no one uses it. So in any case, that's one way of naming things. We have some other options as well with SQL Server, is that it supports the Unicode character set, so any valid Unicode character can be used in an object name. Unicode is, I think it's 1 to 4 bytes technically, but it's technically 2 bytes because most Unicode characters need at least 2 bytes to fit. And one of the things that it was designed to address was the limits of a single byte character set where you'd have to change code pages to manage different languages, different alphabets. So what they did was they said, let's expand it, and we'll use it to store different character sets with different characters. So I took advantage of that here with the AdventureWorks names here. And as I drag this over, you can see that, well, in this case, there's a tab character between each letter. It just doesn't render an Object Explorer. When I grab this one, this slightly wider AdventureWorks, it's actually got a line feed between each character. And when I go and do a new query on this character, you can see it stretches out this name up here, this thing up here. So you can tell people, man, why is your status bar so fat? You just keep it away from the cookies or whatever. And the other thing that you get too is, since Unicode is handling international languages and international character sets, there are some languages that are actually written from right to left. I think some are also written vertically. Hebrew and Arabic are written from right to left, and they have included some support to handle rewriting the characters in there. So there's actually a little hidden invisible character that changes the direction of the word here. And I'm going to see if I can get it to work here. Okay. So I'm going to hit backspace. And as you can see, it switched the name here. So there's a rendering bug. It actually works correctly in Object Explorer, but it does not work correctly in the query window. So as you can see, what looks like AdventureWorks is really Skro-Rodnevda. I think that might have been the original name of AdventureWorks. They said, you know what, that's just kind of hard to pronounce and all that. If you're looking for interesting variations on Unicode, I got a little query here. I don't know if I have the scripts uploaded to the past site, but I'll try to get them up there. And you can just generate all of the 2-byte Unicode characters and scroll through them and find fun things. And if you want to know more about like spaces in the names, you don't have to just limit yourself to ASCII spaces. You can use a whole family of Unicode white space. Some interesting examples here. So we have the, let's zoom here, no break space, end space, M space, punctuation, thin space, hair space, all of these things. And my favorite, the zero width space. Does anyone want to guess what this one does? You don't have to guess, I'll show you. This actually renders space characters that don't appear anywhere. So this is 1,002 bytes long, and it's just A and B. So this is a great thing to do, for naming databases, especially if you want to go into Azure SQL database, because you can apply, this is where I use zero with spaces in all of these here. So they all look like AdventureWorks, but they're all unique names. They're all different. I won't tell you how I did this last one unless you come up after and give me money. Let's see. But you can look at this couple links here if I upload the scripts. And also some SQL Saturdays I've done this at, and you can get these scripts from the uploads there as well. So any questions? Anybody liking this? Okay. All right. I'll keep going. And I think I'm done with this version here. Let me get back to my slides. So you noticed I had also duplication with, not just AdventureWorks, also duplication with Enjoy, and that's also taking advantage of the Unicode character set. Since it represents different languages or different alphabets, some of these alphabets have the same glyph or the same symbol that look exactly the same. So in Latin, we have the letter A. In Greek, we have the letter alpha. Cyrillic alphabet also has the letter A. Cyrillic that's their Va symbol, their V sound, their V letter, but it looks like a B, which also looks like the Greek letter beta. So I was not closely supervised at work one day, and then went through the character set as best I could and put this list together, again, so you don't have to. So if you want to play with AdventureWorks, you have about 4 or 5 variations on the characters in AdventureWorks, and you can just put them all together and make all kinds of combinations. And that's the basis of, keep hitting the wrong one here. Where am I here? Naming, duplicates, not duplicate tables. Oh, I had the Enjoy table in here somewhere. So basically, I found multiple options for the letters E, N, J, O, and Y, and generated the enjoy tables from that list. Should be in here. And my machine froze up. Let's see. Duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. All right, if I don't find it in 2 seconds, I'm going to move on. Ah, here they are. So I go into duplicate objects, and as you can see, here's basically a little table with some codes. Here are all the code points. That's sort of the numeric code for a Unicode character. And you can just query all of these, and you can just get a couple of examples of what's available as far as letters. So like the letter O has 4 different symbols, Y has 4 symbols, and so on. And then when I looked at the enjoy table, I found about 10 or so different options here. And when you add them all up, you get about 108 versions just using different Unicode characters. So this is all legit, and you can create this. And this doesn't actually include any Latin characters. If you want Latin characters, you get 570 variations on enjoy. So I'll leave that to you if you want to play with 570 enjoy tables. I think it's overkill for this particular demo. Next, we are going to essay, the lovely essay. The one that everyone just has to impersonate, has to be. So I decided I was going to see if I could convince people to not use essay. And the story I came up with is that since essay is a system administrator login, it's very busy. It has a lot of responsibility. It does a lot of things in the background. You'll see SPWho, you'll see a lot of SA sessions running and stuff like that. So if you log in as SA, you are increasing its burden. You're increasing the load on it, and you're making it work even harder. And because of that, the system might start misbehaving. It might slow down. The system might, do odd, strange things. And this sounds like, well, Rob, it doesn't do that when I use SA, which is bad. You should not be using SA. You should disable it or change the password or rename it or all three. But if you have to leave SA around, or if you just want to have that one little backdoor login that only you can use and you want to discourage other people, here's where we get into this stuff. So I'll go over a couple features here. Logon triggers, event notifications, resource governor. You can attack, you can attack your devs. You can limit their use at the server level with these features. And then if you want to get more granular, you can get down to individual tables where you can affect whether SA can do things to tables or not, using triggers or using constraints. All right, and that's in yet another window. Here we go. I'm going to start first with event notifications. This is a fantastic feature. It's underappreciated. I might not be able to get the full demo here just because of the example that I use. It's based on Service Broker, which is SQL Server's built-in messaging system. This allows you to have a queue which can accept messages from various options. And it has a table behind it, and you use a different syntax to take data in and out of it. But one of the nice things is that when you insert something into a queue, it will run an activation procedure, which I have here. So I'm going to have this procedure run every time I insert a message, and this will happen when someone logs in. And what I'll do is I'll check to see if they're logged in as SA or if they're running as a SQL agent job. And that's the logic I use for all of these. If you're running SQL agent as SA, I don't care. If you're not running as SA, I don't care. If you are logging in as SA, I'm going to dump the procedure cache, and I'm going to dump all the data caches. This helps build the idea that, oh, the database is slow. Did you log in as SA? Yeah, that's why. Okay. Every time you log in as SA, disk I/O goes way up. Everything recompiles, and all that. So there's a little bit of bookkeeping here. So that's one option you can use here. But here's if you wanted to play with this, you can create the queue and everything like that. And then I just associate the stored procedure here. Here's the name of the stored procedure that will be activated, that will execute whenever I add something. Now the event notification will insert a message in the queue every time someone does an audit login, which means I'm going to log into the server. If I log in, it'll run that procedure, it'll do the evaluation, and then it'll decide what it's going to do. Let's see. So let me run this. This is for Hobbs. There's already an object there. See, I planned ahead. So I'm going to connect to Hobbs and query the database, and then I'm going to query the cached plans, and I have 14 cached plans. I log in as SA. And you see how it's kind of slow now. Because I left the logon trigger that I was going to show next activated on this procedure, and you can see that that took about 10 seconds or so before it returned, oh, there's only 8 plans in cache now. I run it again, and 8 seconds later, oh God, yeah, I got to get a better setup procedure going here. Kind of slow, kind of slow, kind of slow, and I only got 6 plans left. So it's dumping the procedure cache every time I log in, and it's dumping it really slowly. So again, I've slowed down SQL Server, and it does things that I don't want it to do. And if I really want to discourage people from using it, what I'll do is I'll change the logic slightly to say I want to change the name of the database of AdventureWorks. Just to show you, so we have AdventureWorks here. So let me modify that stored procedure slightly. Oh, I gotta go here. So I'll change that procedure a little bit, and I'll log in as SA again, and it's really slow, and then I gotta wait, and I get 11 plans, and now my AdventureWorks is suspect. And that was a suggestion from someone who's seen this presentation previously. His name slips my mind, but if you have any suggestions or contributions you'd like to make, I'd be happy to incorporate them in here and take credit for them, but thank you. Jim Murphy from Nashville, that's his name. You've seen this before, haven't you?
No, I haven't.
You haven't, okay, because that comes up a little later, probably in this one right here. So that's event notifications. You can attach a procedure to events. It doesn't necessarily have to be logins, but very, very, very nice feature. Sadly underutilized. Logon triggers, they have been used. There's a couple of good examples in the documentation. And basically, these are what they say they are. It's a bit of code that fires during a logon event. And you can apply similar logic as you saw earlier. In this case, I'm checking to see if you're SA or SQL agent, and I don't care what happens if you're running under that context. So I'll just go and connect, create that login trigger, or drop it and recreate it. And then let's see, now I want to, again, I wanted to tell people, hey, you know, it's busy, it's, you know, got other things to do. You really don't want to use SA that much. So I incorporate a couple of different persuasions here. So if I'm just doing a basic, hey, you're logged in as SA, let's wait 5 seconds, you know, for that to come up. Reprisal, let's say you're using a link table to Microsoft Access and you're using the SA login and password. That takes a little bit longer. And then if you're in that person who's in accounting or whoever you are who has that computer named that, you wait a little bit longer to log in as SA. So let me get that in there, and I'll demo this. And let me connect up to Hobbs as SA. And we hit connect, and it kind of just sits there. It's kind of slow. It's taking its time. You know why it's taking extra time? Because it sets a new login for the Object Explorer. So that's going to take another 5 seconds or so to come up. And then, you see why I say not to run this in production. So I'm going to go in here, and every time it's got to make a new connection, it takes 5 or 6 seconds to log in. You know what else this affects, which speeds this up? IntelliSense. So if your IntelliSense cache needs to be refreshed, brand new connection, and it's, you know, at that point you're like, shit, I can write the whole query by now, you know. So that's a logon trigger, everyone. And if you think that's cool, actually, you know what? Let me make sure I turn this off because it's going to malfunction something else here. Triggers, let's say logon priority. Go away. And it takes 10 seconds for me to connect just to drop the logon trigger. Yeah. I said don't run it in production. Oh, boy. But it dropped it quickly, which is good. OK. The last one, if you have Enterprise Edition available, is Resource Governor. This one's a little sneakier because not a lot of people know it. It's sort of like event notifications. It doesn't actually have anything in the, event notifications doesn't have anything in the GUI. When you have it, SSMS, you can see some resource governor stuff in there. Let me get the right instance here. And it's under management, and no one goes in here under management except to look at the error logs. But you can see I have resource governor, and there's some settings here and all that. And what this was intended to do is to help you control the resources that a query can use, because you have the end of month accounting report that takes 9 hours to run, and it hits every table, locks everything. So you can assign a resource pool. When people log in, they can have a function applied to put them into the resource pool, and then you can limit the amount of basically damage or resources that they can grab. So I'm going to set up here, well, I've already set it up, but I'll walk you through the statements. Is I have to create a function. And what this will do is, again, look to see if you're SA or if you're SQL agent. If you fall under that category, you get in the SA login priority resource pool, okay? Otherwise, you go to the default pool and you get normal behavior. And here I create the very generous SA login priority resource pool where you get a maximum 1% CPU. You get affinitized to a single core, so no matter how many cores you have, you only get one. You only really need about 1% of memory on the system, so that's all I give you. And yeah, 1 I/O per second, that sounds about right. I also then, you need to apply a workload group, and then if you have multiple people logging in as SA, they get to fight over the 1% of 1% that's there. So I'm going to turn this on. This has already been created. And let me go and log into ENT as SA and click, and this, oh, this is faster. Okay, this is still pretty slow. Yeah, it takes a while. This even affects, I think, the drop down up here for the databases. I think if I click on, let me do a new query window here. And yep, it takes a few seconds there. I click on this. I mean, everything's slow. Everything's slow with this. One of the nice new features with SQL Server 2019 is that you can now use decimals in your resource percentages. Haven't explored those yet, but if 1% sounds like too much for you, you might be able to go lower. I'm not gonna test IntelliSense with it, but that one's kind of fun. I like using that one. It's just that right now I believe I know it's definitely Enterprise Edition. It may or may not be available, or it might not be available in other editions. So we went over server level ways of controlling SA access, but let's say you can't do that or you don't want to do that. But you don't want people to be able to go in and modify data if you can avoid it. You actually have that ability. You can do a couple of different methods. So in this case, I'm going to create a table, or two tables. One will be called no SA, the other will be called no sysadmin, and they'll have check constraints on them. And this will say that, hey, the original login can't be equal to SA. So if I go to insert or update data, and as I'm logged in as SA, I'll get a constraint violation. I can also check if my sysadmins, if they're logging in as sysadmin and making data changes rather than the logins that are supposed to be used, then that will also fail. That'll give you an error there. So I'll create those, and I'll come down here. So I'm going to have 3 different connections. One will be my regular login. This is a sysadmin, but it's not SA. I'll log in as SA, and then I'll log in as this lame login that just has very basic rights. But this would be my application login. This would be the one that I want to be able to make changes. I'd say I could probably run them. Yeah, I can run them one at a time. So I'll run the no SA first, and as you can see, I got an error message here. Constraint was violated because I was logged in. I was trying to insert into the no sysadmin table, which isn't allowed. And when I try SA, I get 2 error messages. SA is in sysadmin, plus it's also SA. And then lastly, my lame login succeeds on both tables. No errors. And as you can see, based on the data I had, there'll only be 1 row and no sysadmin, and that was the lame login. And then since I was an SA, we have 2 rows. So that's a table level way of preventing people from abusing SA to make modifications. Unfortunately, it does not work for deletes because a constraint's not, foreign key constraint would be evaluated if there was one, but check constraint would not be. But that's where you reach for triggers, which are not in this script. Oh, it's down a little further. I'll come to that in a second. So a trigger, a delete trigger, when that fires, you could just tell the delete trigger, hey, roll this back if they're logged in as SA. And the code will be, if not in this script, it'll be in another script. But what you can also do is if you have the option to control your data access and make everyone use a view or stored procedure to get stuff, you can add handy little where clauses like this. So I can go and connect to Hobbs. Does not exist. Yeah, I forgot. I renamed it. Let me go and rename it back. This is the other reason why it changes. Rename, rename, rename. Take the suspect off of it. No, not 2 S's. This is why you're told not to type in a demo. Okay. So I'll create the view, and then I'll log in as my normal self, and I'll do a count, and I get 121,000 rows. When I log in as SA, I get nothing, and like it. So this is another way of saying, hey, I'm querying this table. There's no data in it. Did you log in as SA? Yeah, well, that's why there's no data. You can do that. There's another variation I had on that one, where not only would it not return any data, you'll also get a big fat error. Let me go and create this in TempDB real quick. So I just selected from this view, I get 1 row. Let me go and log in as SA. Connect. Where am I? Log in as Hobbs. SA. It logged in fast that time. And now I go into new query. TempDB. Select asterisk from B. And I get a divide by 0 error. So that's a little more discouraging than just getting no data, But you can just do that in the text of the view. So the definition will be able to look at the original login. There's some other functions. There's some other things you can do. They'll show up later in the presentation. And then here's where the trigger code comes in. So a very basic trigger after insert. If someone's logged in as SA, you just do a rollback. That's a little blunt. Yeah, aw, see, that's mean, right? So let's spice that up a little bit. Let's raise a severity 25 error, which disconnects them from the server and rolls back the transaction. That's kind of mean. And then if they really don't get the hint, what you do is you then grab their machine name and you email everyone in the company, hey, this person at this machine is using SA and raise a 25 severity level error, and all that. And as you can see in the comments here, the one thing I found annoying about triggers is that you can't run shutdown inside of a DML trigger. Because if you log in as SA and then the server just turns off, that's the ultimate discouragement to keep them from logging in as SA. You can't do that in a DML trigger. You want to hear how you can do it? I'll show you later. So there you go. This is how you keep people from using SA. For everything, anyway. So now we get into, here's the preventative stuff. This is the part where I apologize for having some practical material, things that can actually be useful and all that. So how many of you have devs that love ORMs and the joyous SQL that they generate? Okay, a couple, about 10 people or so. Do they use cursors? They do? Yeah. Hate it, don't you? Yeah. Anybody accidentally drop tables in production? Thank you. No. It has to be you. Okay, you 1, 3, 4, 5, 6 honest people. Okay. How about, did you ever run a statement and forget to highlight the where clause in production? Thank you. Your honesty's integrity has been restored. And finally, select asterisk. Anybody have devs that use nothing but select asterisk? Okay. Got a couple of solutions for you there. We'll get into, is there a question? Someone have a question? No? Okay. Maybe get back over here. So let's take a few interesting things here. So I don't have a lot of, I have some dynamic SQL in my, where I work. It's not too bad. It's not written too bad, but I wanted to get everybody to move to stored procedures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another check constraint. It's a little bit different. And it will actually check to see if you're running in the context of a procedure or a trigger. It's going to do that by looking at this function here, @proc ID. This is the object ID of the currently running procedure or a code object. So this will give you an ID, which I then pass into the object name function, and then that will evaluate to a real name. If it's not running inside of a stored procedure, the name is gibberish, it'll come out as null, it won't have a real name, and then it would violate this constraint. So I'll go into tempdb, create the table, and now I'll create a stored procedure that will insert into this no ad hoc table. And I'll run that. And I'll just insert a 1, and there you go, run it again. I got 2 1s in there. So that works like you expect it to. I'm going to try a no ad hoc to insert the value of 2, and that violates the constraint because this object ID, such as it is, does not have an object name associated with it. So I can prevent you from updating or inserting while you're running as SA, or in this case, an ad hoc batch. But the same kind of constraint can be applied, which I showed earlier with the SA. I'll insert a 3 into the table, and that completes successfully. But when I try to update and turn everything negative, I get the nice handy prompt to tell me how to run it with a where clause, and I get update occurred, constraint was violated, and as you can see, everything came back as 1 or 3, nothing is negative. So when you get into wanting to prevent deletes, an ad hoc delete statement, and make it done through a stored procedure, you would just revert to or utilize a trigger. So I have similar logic here for a regular trigger. This compares the nesting level incremented by a trigger only versus the entire procedure level. When these two are equal, it means that the trigger is the only procedure running, therefore it's running in an ad hoc batch. It was not called from a stored procedure. So it has a nice little message here that you're running an ad hoc batch, and sends you a little message to disconnect you. And then I can do, in this case, a delete trigger. I do it instead of delete. So if I detect that it's an ad hoc batch, I just, again, throw an error, roll it back. If it isn't an ad hoc batch, I actually perform the delete here. You could do this in an after trigger as well. You could just roll it back. I think I'm going to skip this demo for the purposes of time, but this code, and again, you can find this in various places, and you can play with this. This one's relatively safe, but again, make backups. So for the 4 honest people who drop tables in production, there's an actual really simple way to prevent that from happening. You can't truncate a table or drop a table if it has a foreign key associated with it. And all you have to do is just create a foreign key that references itself. So you already need a primary key of some kind. It's a very fast foreign key. It doesn't really have to do a lot of lookups and stuff. But when I go to try to truncate these tables, can't truncate them because of the reference there. And if I try to drop them, oh, it did drop. Oh, I did something wrong, yeah. But I can't truncate, but I can delete successfully. And then dropping them because I guess the sequence, I guess they dropped in the correct order, and it dropped the referenced tables. So, but this would prevent you from dropping a table accidentally. Because anyone else have the ETL thing that people do where they drop the table every time, then insert data, then drop it at the end? Folks do that. I don't get that one either, but that's one way to keep them from doing that if you don't like that. So I also don't really like it when they use cursors, so I reach out for a check constraint, no cursors, and I look to see if the add cursor rows is greater than 0. So if I have an active cursor, this will violate the constraint. And of course, this only works on inserting data while the cursor is active, so I'll try to insert this. I'll insert the 1, and that will succeed. Declare cursor. Let me move this down a little bit here. Declare the cursor, open it, and try to insert, and it fails. There's an active cursor. Once it's deallocated, though, I can insert normally. So if they like to write cursors and do all this kinds of craziness, you could just put that constraint in there. It keeps them from using cursors. And the nice thing is this cursor here doesn't actually select from anything. It's just an active cursor, so it doesn't even have to be on a table. You can just have it select any expression at all. This one I have used in production. This accommodates the not highlighting the where clause thing here, and it's pretty simple. Just looks at row count, and if it's above a particular threshold, it sends you a nice helpful message to tell you that you need to highlight the where clause. So we'll try to insert into that table, and hey, we get handy little error message here. And what I can do is I can say select top 5. So I'll only get 5 rows here, and those 5 rows succeed. They're below the threshold. So you can find a threshold for a particular operation. You can set that in the trigger, and that's pretty basic, and it's not too much of a hassle. So this one, I just discovered that this has a rather interesting lineage. I learned about this from Jorge Segarra. He's SQL Chicken on Twitter. He works at Microsoft. He's been there for a while. If you want to prevent people from using the select asterisk, you add a column, conveniently named asterisk, and you have it computed as to divide by 0. And this does the handy divide by 0 error we saw before. A lot of people had said that they'd heard about this from Brent Ozar, and they had. And I found out from Brent that he actually got this from Jorge. Just this week, I learned that Jorge got it from Adam Jorgensen. And then Aaron Bertrand said, yes, I've heard about it, but I got it from Remus Rusanu. So there are about 1 million fathers for this particular feature here, but this one is actually really harmless, and I would say you could possibly get away with doing this in a production system. So if I select just the one column, hey, that's great, I only get the one column. If I select asterisk, yeah, that doesn't work. So I had a homework assignment for people in the past. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to come up with a policy-based management rule that applies this column, forces this column on all your tables and views, so no one can select asterisk from anything. Okay. I have another couple of features here, but there's one that I wanted to also address. I mentioned earlier not selecting the where clause, accidentally updating the whole table, and maybe you don't want to or you can't use triggers to overcome some of them. And again, if you have the option of doing all your data access through views, you can do a simple little cross apply here to look at your current execution request, retrieve the text of the code you're actually running for your session ID, your current ID, and then make sure that the word where appears in there. So I'm actually having a view query itself while it runs to find out if there's a where clause, and if there isn't one, it won't return any data. What do you mean it doesn't exist? Oh, I logged in as SA again. Sorry, 1 second. Oh, jeez. You're learning the importance of turning off the things you're demoing that you tell people ahead of time are going to malfunction just so they don't malfunction. Okay, let's turn that on again. So I'm going to connect to Hobbs as my normal self, and I'm not going to highlight the where clause, and I get no data because there's no where in there. If I highlight the where clause, now I get data. This is, again, contrived, but it would be really nice. You can include that, and now you don't even have to worry about the triggers, because if they update the view, if they do everything through the view, or you do it through a stored procedure, you can ensure that the condition is met, that they can, there's a where clause in place. I can even do a delete, and again, I'm not going to demo this for the purposes of time, but if I delete from the view, there's no where clause, it won't delete anything. And then you would have to run the delete with the where clause to make sure you're not deleting the whole table. All right, so that's prevention. All right, and just to, in case you're thinking, hey, I mentioned that Jorge came up with the no select asterisk and all that. It's not just me that comes up with this stuff. We have some really wonderful people. Aaron Bertrand, for instance, has, there's a virtual chapter video there that he talks about some nice little DBCC settings that can completely screw up the optimizer and its behavior. So again, for purposes of time, I don't have a demo for these. We have Eric Darling. Has a nice little query that will bring any number of cores you have up to 100% and keep them there. He's had people test this up to 64 cores, machine's totally unusable. With no data access at all. You don't have to create anything. It's just a big fat CTE. Brent Ozar, everyone loves him, thinks he's a nice guy. He built a fork bomb in his thing. Matter of fact, I'm going to switch over to these in my handy browser window. So here's Eric's 100% CPU query right here. You can see it's a little complicated here. Doesn't select from any tables. Apparently he's limited to only the top 2 billion rows from the top 2 billion rows of this thing here. Oh, no, go back here. Switch back here. And here you can see 48 cores going to 100%. So that's pretty nice. I could use that. I'll just tell people, hey, the system is slow. It better be. Brent, they seem to have a competition going over there in this company, and he went a little bit further. He has a stored procedure that creates an agent job that runs that stored procedure. So this is a recursive job creation process. I'm not going to demo this. I'll let you do that on your own time. But for all the things that Brent helps this, he makes utilities available and all that. He's an evil, evil person. Very evil. Another mild-mannered gentleman, very helpful to the community, who I don't ever want to anger, is sitting in the front row here, Mr. Kenneth Fisher. He and I had an interesting conversation a week or two ago about the wonderful char 0. This is the null character in the ASCII character set and all that. And in a C-based program that's based in C, a char 0 means this is the end of a string. So he found that in some cases it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the string. You can embed a char 0 and still have it show up in certain output. So I have the link to the tweet where he started discussing this. And I found that he hates no-lock hints even more than I do. And I don't like no-lock at all. I even have a query to prevent no-lock from being used. So check out Kevin's blog. It's over here. And here are the handy, just search for no-lock stuff here. And yeah, I'll let you run that one in your production as well. One last thing too, I might come back to this. I'll mention it now just in case I forget. How many people have devs that like to store like blobs, like videos, huge things in the database and all that? You got those too? Okay. So I figured you might want to give them an opportunity to store a slightly different kind of package. This is what they call a zip bomb. This is basically a recursive zip file that runs multiple times and unzips itself to rather large sizes. This particular version has a 42K zip file that unzips to 5 gigs, a 10 meg that goes to 281 terabytes, and if that's not enough, 46 meg in a zip file that explodes to 4.5 petabytes. So when they want to upload a blob or something like that, put this in your database. This might be one of those I mentioned earlier for your last day at a job you hate. You might want to put that one up in there. Just in case, the severance package doesn't quite work out the way you wanted it to. I'm going to close this because I think I'm finished here. So there you go, a couple more things. So here's where we get to, this is what you've all been waiting for. This is the mean stuff. And this is something that came out of something I had happen at a previous job where they were running SQL Server under a service account that had domain admin privileges. And you'll hear, oh, that's a no-no, don't do that. All the advice, oh, change that immediately, that's bad and everything like that. Just hang on one second here. There are some opportunities you can take advantage of with these elevated permissions. One of the best ones is after you see some of the things you can do with a domain admin privilege, it strengthens your argument for why devs shouldn't have SA access. Because you'll see what some of the things you can do here. And some of these are just mean. So part of it is elevated access. Others is just, you don't like people. You're antisocial kind of thing. And that is, where does that go here? Oh, the next one. Let's get them all here. Yeah, here's a couple good ones. So let's start a first one. So SQL Server, when you do backups, you back up to files normally. You can also create a device and just use the device name. So I have a super fast backup device here, and I map it to a drive. In this case, I map it to the null drive. There is no such drive. So I named it super fast backup because watch this. I think it's already been created. I'm going to back up database here, and that was quick, 1.2 gigs per second. I'm going to try to restore from it, and it's not such a great restore source. So basically, this is the device you use when you want to test your I/O throughput. The null device just doesn't write anything. You'll read stuff off a disk, and it'll just get black holed. It'll go nowhere. But again, look at how fast I can back this database up multiple times. I mean, hundreds of megs a second. just can't really restore them. So this is, again, one of those, hey, I'm not really happy working here anymore, and we'll change the backup jobs, and the company might ask you to come in later and consult on some, recovery things here. Let's see. Implicit transactions. For those unfortunate souls who have to work with Oracle, you'll know that when you update statements and stuff like that, you have to put an explicit commit transaction. So this is called an implicit transaction, and I think it was Sybase originally created this setting known as implicit transactions so that you could simulate that behavior in Oracle. So if you were used to writing the commit transaction, you would do that. Before I get to that, though, I'm going to show one little fun little table I have here, and this is just something that just generates a random error. So I can just insert values here, and I'll just insert, and then at a random interval, it will just fail because of this random number, generates a random number, divides it by 24, has to be less than 10. So that happens probably like one in, well, now 2 in a row. It kind of just happens at random. What did I change with that one? I have a variation on that here. So what I'll do is I don't want this table around anymore. It's causing me hassles. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set implicit transactions on. I'm going to drop it, and then I'm going to turn this off. This is another good drive-by you can do. So I'm going to drop this table in a transaction. It's not actually dropped yet because I haven't done the commit. But what I'm going to do is close the window because I'm done here, and we get this fun message. You've seen this, right? How many of you actually clicked anything other than yes? 2 people. That's pretty high. 4 people. Okay. Yeah. Everyone clicks yes. Do you know what happens when you click yes? You drop the table. So that table's gone. I'm going to hit cancel. So that table is still there. So that's mean. It's not as mean as this, where you turn on implicit transactions, run SPMs for each table, drop all the tables, and then turn it off. And this is short enough that you can kind of do this as a drive-by. And then that'll drop every table. And it'll be in a transaction. They go to close the window, and the tables are fine. Everything's there until they click yes. And then all the tables are gone. So that's mean, right? Yeah, I think that's pretty mean. Oh, I was supposed to delete all of these things here. I'll come back to those. I'm gonna click no. Yeah, I'm not gonna commit that transaction. So I got an instead of trigger. So this is a nice little thing. This is to convince, try to make people think, hey, everything's going along fine. I'm just going to create this simple little test table. Let me put this in tempdb here. Simple little test trigger table, and I'm going to create a trigger on it that instead of inserting, we'll just do this little bit of code here. So if 1 is equal to 2, it'll print something. It won't actually print anything. Thank you. So I'll hit insert, but the nice thing is I get 1 row affected. So it looks like I inserted something, but it didn't. So you can include this as well as for updates as well. The problem is once they expect to see rows updated and it comes back as 0, you can start thinking, well, maybe did you highlight the where clause? Maybe there's no data. Makes them wonder where all the data went. I'm gonna close this. Oh, I have another random thing. So before I showed you where it would insert and have a random error. This one is actually a random error based on how many rows you're inserting at a time. So I'll do tempdb. I'll insert 1 row. This pretty much always succeeds if I insert 1 row. If I try to insert 2 rows, I sometimes get an error. And sometimes it succeeds. And again, 3 rows probably will succeed a little less frequently and so on. 3 rows worked. And so on. So that's just, again, based on comparing row count to a random number I generate within a certain range. And again, if I don't necessarily want to do that, or if I want to play a trick, I can have that evaluated only when I'm logged in as SA. So again, if they log in as SA, hey, I tried to insert data and it errored out. Yeah, you logged in as SA, that's why. You're not supposed to log in as SA. Works on my machine, So that I'll leave that out for thing here. But again, it's pretty much the same. Oh, I must have copied these into multiple files. Okay. The previous script. So I mentioned earlier about if someone logs in as SA, can we just shut down the server? Can't do it in a trigger, can't do it in a logon trigger, but you can do it in a SQL agent job. and you can create and call that job from a logon trigger. So here's the gist of it. You basically take this code here, paste this into your logon trigger. When they log in as SA, it'll create it, and then you can just basically run this as well. So let me create this. This should be on the enterprise. Let me close a few of these. So I'm logged in as myself. I'll connect to enterprise. So I have a job now. And you can see it here. It's just a small little column just to make it look a little nondescript. You know, I should have made it a 0 with space. Darn it. So let me go back here. So I'm going to connect to enterprise and set up my logon trigger. And in this case, again, checks for the SA logic and will run the job. So let me connect as my normal self. Oh, didn't work. Yeah, let me just do this. So I'll just connect as my normal self, no problems here. I'll connect as SA, and it's disconnecting. And then when I try to connect as SA again, wow, it's really slow because it's really not running. In fact, it's not even refreshing in the window here. So that job got run, and it shut down the server with no wait, by the way, because you're spiteful and you're angry, and you don't want any recovery to run when you shut down the server. And this will probably freeze my system here. So don't run this in production. Oh, boy. All right, so while that's taking forever to shut down, I'll get you into the next one. So I mentioned, again, with the elevated sysadmin privileges or the domain admin privileges that you might have in small shops. This happens a lot. There's startups. Everyone has to do every job, so they all have domain admin privileges. And then they set up services to run with those privileges. And what happens is that if you combine the service account running under domain admin privileges with the SA login or a sysadmin login, you can take advantage of turning on XP command shell. This will allow you to run command line tools, command line things from SQL Server. So you may not have access to the server other than to connect the SQL Server, but now you can run utilities that let you access the hardware or the virtual aspects of it if it's a virtualized machine. So I have a VM here. I'm going to configure show advanced on and turn on XP command shell. And then what I can do is now I can run this as if I was running it from a command line. I can run this net user command. And it will give me some output here. And this is basically giving me a list of all the local users. I also can pass it a domain flag. So I have administrator, default account, and guest. If I go to the domain, I get a couple of different names. I have administrator, default account, and here's my service account here, service.da. So this is a domain level user that I can access from SQL Server without having any actual machine access. But you know what? I kind of like this machine. I want to come back. So I'm going to add a user named Hobbs with a password, and I'll add them to the local machine. And as we saw before, we don't have a Hobbs here, just administrator and default account. And I'll add Hobbs. And when I run it again, you'll now see Hobbs as a user. I've just added a backdoor user to the local machine. So now I can log into the machine directly. And let's just say I want to, oh, you know what? Let me join the domain. It looks like a fun domain. Let me add that. I was supposed to run domain. Oh, we didn't have Calvin before in the domain users. Now we have Calvin. You can see that Calvin is now a domain user. But you know what? They just don't want to be lone users, you know, Calvin and Hobbs. They like, they like to socialize and all that. So let's take a look at some groups that are available on the machine. We have the local administrators group on the VM. We have the domain admins group on the domain. Those sound like fun people. Let's add ourselves to them. So I'll add Hobbs to the local administrator group. There he is. Now he can do everything that the administrator can do on the local machine. Calvin, needing to one-up Hobbs, is going to join the domain as a domain admin. Can anyone see where this is going? Okay, so I've got Calvin is now in charge, or can be in charge of the domain, and I'll take a look at the administrator. So this is the domain administrator, and I got a little bit of information here, and I noticed that he's allowed to log on pretty much any time of day he wants to log on. Not anymore. I'm going to use this net user. I'm going to set him so that he can only log on between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. on a Friday. Run that, and now he can't log in outside of that time zone. Okay, probably out partying or something like that, out with friends or whatever. That's cool. And then, you know what? I don't really want him to log in ever again. I'm going to go and change his password and not tell him what it is. So this is where you now, just through SQL Server, have taken over the domain of whatever company you're at. Probably don't want to do this as a consultant. But if you're facing a layoff, or you're not getting the raise or the salary that you think you deserve, this improves your negotiating position substantially. So before you take away those domain admin privileges, let's explore the opportunities that it might grant you. And then if you need to fix this, I was a nice guy, I'll put this here. So now I can reset the administrator back there. The password has still been changed though. So I've just taken over the administrator password. And I've got a backdoor domain admin and local admin as well. Thank you. So that's all for that. And oh, I forgot to, just to show you that it actually does pick up. So here's the domain controller. I'm in the users window here. And as you can see, there's no Calvin user right here now. Oh, I can't zoom in. And then if I refresh it, no. Refresh this, and there's Calvin. So entirely through SQL Server, I've added domain administrators, and now I can run rampant and do nasty things to their domain. And this is terrible at switching back to things here. So at this stage, this is where I ask the audience, how many of you are going to go back to work on Monday with a renewed sense of purpose and joy in your job? About a third of you or something like that. Did you learn something? Great. Okay. So some interesting things, and again, these are not the normal standard ways to use these features, but now you know that there are features out there that you could utilize. And you know what? In dev, if you don't like your dev team, go to dev and put this stuff in there. Indulge your dark side, play a little bit. You know, have some fun. You know, make them wonder, why is my query so slow? Did you log in as SA? I mean, if you make that your mantra, they'll stop using SA. Definitely not production. I hope the demos have shown you the danger of doing this in production, but knock yourself out in dev. And if you were curious about where the title came from, Miss Julie Smith came up with the title Revenge the Sequel, and she has very nice shoes that she wore a few years ago and we took a picture of. My email is there. SQL_R is my Twitter, @outlook.com if you have any questions. My blog is in transition, SQLR with no underscore, SQLR.io. There's only one blog on there now. The new ones will show up there. My blog archive is at the SQLteam.com blog site. Some of the things I've demoed here were in some earlier blog articles. Any last questions, suggestions? Anybody have any suggestions for things we can do? Kenneth, what a surprise.
Begin transaction, go 1,000.
Begin transaction, go 1,000. Oh, that's wrong. Okay. For folks that aren't aware of this feature, you can take a statement, say select one, and say go, and then put a number after it, and it will do that number of times. So that's nice. So this dude is saying begin tran, and then I'm not doing it 1,000 times. So I'm not running this either. Yeah, I'm learning that I should not trust Kenneth's. I know. No. All right. All right. Batch execution. I'm going to close it. Oh. Okay. Oh, you can't drop a database in transaction. Okay. Anyway. All right. That's it. Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.